Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is Who Burned the Library of Alexandria? You get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments on where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Who burned the Library of Alexandria? There was once a place where humanity dreamed of collecting every piece of knowledge ever written. A place where philosophers debated the meaning of life, mathematicians uncovered the hidden language of the universe, astronomers mapped the stars, physicians studied the human body, and poets gave words to the deepest emotions of mankind. This place was not a legend. It truly existed. It was the Library of Alexandria. For centuries, people have asked the same haunting question: who burned the Library of Alexandria? The answer is far more complicated than a single name, a single war, or a single fire. It is a mystery that has survived for more than 2,000 years. Some blame Julius Caesar. Others point to religious conflicts during the Roman Empire. Still, others accuse later conquerors. Historians continue to debate the evidence because the truth has been buried beneath centuries of conflicting accounts, lost records, and powerful myths. To understand how such a remarkable institution disappeared, we must first understand why it was created. The story does not begin with flames, it begins with a dream. More than 2,000 years ago, the city of Alexandria stood proudly on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, the city was intended to become the greatest center of culture, trade, and learning in the ancient world. Alexander himself never lived to see the city reach its full glory. After his death, in 323 BCE, his vast empire was divided among his generals. Egypt came under the rule of Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander's closest companions. Ptolemy understood that military strength alone could never guarantee lasting greatness. He believed that true power also came from knowledge. Instead of building only armies and fortresses, Ptolemy invested in scholars, philosophers, scientists, and writers. His vision was extraordinary. He wanted Alexandria to become the intellectual capital of the world. That vision led to one of history's most ambitious projects. The Library of Alexandria was not simply a building filled with books. It was an institution unlike anything humanity had ever attempted before. Its mission was breathtakingly simple: collect every written work in existence. Imagine the scale of that ambition. In an age without printing presses, every book had to be copied by hand. Every scroll represented weeks or even months of careful labor. Every manuscript was precious. Yet the rulers of Egypt believed that gathering all human knowledge into one place was possible. Messengers traveled across the Mediterranean searching for rare manuscripts. Merchants arriving at Alexandria's harbor often found their books temporarily confiscated. Skilled scribes copied every scroll before returning the originals, or sometimes keeping the originals while giving owners the copies. Whether entirely true or somewhat exaggerated, these stories reveal just how determined the rulers were to expand their collection. Knowledge became a treasure more valuable than gold. As the years passed, the library continued to grow. Works arrived from Greece, from Persia, from Egypt, from Babylon, from Phoenicia, from India, perhaps even from lands farther east. Texts were translated into Greek, allowing scholars from different cultures to study ideas that had once remained isolated. The Library of Alexandria became one of history's greatest meeting places for civilizations. This was more than collecting books, it was preserving humanity's memory. The library formed part of a larger institution known as the Museion, meaning the Temple of the Muses. Unlike modern museums, the Museion functioned almost like a university. Scholars lived there. They received financial support from the king. Meals were provided. Living quarters were available. Gardens offered peaceful places for discussion. Lecture halls hosted debates. Observatories allowed astronomers to study the heavens. Every day brought new discoveries. Imagine walking through its corridors. Shelves lined with countless papyrus scrolls, the scent of ink and parchment filling the air. Students, listening carefully, as famous teachers explained geometry, philosophy, astronomy, medicine, and literature. Voices speaking different languages echoed through the halls. Questions mattered more than status. Curiosity became a way of life. Many of history's greatest minds either worked in Alexandria or were deeply connected to its scholarly community. Euclid revolutionized mathematics. Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy, using little more than shadows, geometry, and careful observation. Archimedes visited Egypt and exchanged ideas with Alexandrian scholars. Physicians advanced the study of anatomy. Linguists compared ancient texts. Poets composed masterpieces. Historians documented the rise and fall of kingdoms. Every generation added new knowledge. Every discovery inspired another question. The library became a symbol of civilization itself. But greatness often attracts envy. Political rivalries grew stronger. Empires expanded. Wars reshaped the Mediterranean world. Alexandria remained wealthy, influential, and strategically important. Its magnificent harbor welcomed ships from every direction. Its famous lighthouse stood among the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. Its markets overflowed with goods from distant lands. Its library represented something even more valuable. Ideas? Ideas cannot be controlled as easily as armies. Knowledge gives people power. Power invites conflict. As centuries passed, Egypt itself changed. The Ptolemaic dynasty faced internal struggles. Foreign powers watched closely. Rome, once a distant republic, steadily transformed into the dominant force of the Mediterranean. One by one, kingdoms fell beneath Roman influence. Alexandria knew that change was coming. No one could have imagined how dramatically history was about to shift. The fate of the library would eventually become entangled with battles for political power, civil wars, religious transformations, and changing priorities. Yet one important fact is often forgotten. The Library of Alexandria almost certainly did not disappear overnight. Popular culture often imagines a single dramatic fire consuming every scroll in one catastrophic moment. Reality is rarely so simple. Ancient institutions usually decline gradually. Buildings suffer damage. Collections become scattered. Funding disappears. Wars interrupt daily life. Political leaders lose interest. Religious movements replace old traditions. Generations neglect what earlier generations carefully protected. The Library of Alexandria may have experienced all of these challenges. Its story is therefore not merely about destruction. It is also about neglect, about changing civilizations, about how easily knowledge can vanish when people stop protecting it. This makes the mystery even more fascinating. If there was no single fire, if there was no single villain, then why has history remembered the library as one of the greatest tragedies ever recorded? The answer lies partly in what the library represented. It stood for humanity's endless desire to understand the universe, and its destruction became a symbol of everything that can be lost through war, intolerance, political ambition, or simple indifference. Every lost scroll represented a voice that could no longer speak. Every missing manuscript carried ideas that future generations would never read. Perhaps some describe scientific discoveries centuries ahead of their time. Perhaps others contained forgotten histories of vanished civilizations. Perhaps remarkable works of literature disappeared forever. We may never know. That uncertainty fuels the legend. Even today, historians continue searching ancient documents for clues. Archaeologists study the ruins of ancient Alexandria. Researchers compare Roman, Greek, Egyptian, Christian, and Arabic sources. Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. Some theories grow stronger. Others become weaker. Yet the complete truth remains elusive. As we continue this journey, we will examine every major theory with careful attention to historical evidence. Did Julius Caesar accidentally ignite the first flames? Did later Roman emperors allow the library to decline? Did religious conflict destroy what remained? Or has the entire story been misunderstood for centuries? The mystery begins here, and the deeper we investigate, the more surprising the answers become. Alexandria, the city that wanted to own all knowledge. If the Library of Alexandria was the heart of learning, then the city of Alexandria itself was the lifeblood that kept it alive. Before we can understand how the library was lost, we must understand the remarkable city that made such an ambitious institution possible. When Alexander the Great founded Alexandria in 331 BCE, he envisioned more than another military outpost. He wanted a city that would unite the cultures of Greece and Egypt while serving as the gateway between Africa, Asia, and Europe. Although Alexander died before seeing his dream realized, his successors transformed Alexandria into one of the greatest cities the ancient world had ever known. Within a few generations, Alexandria had become a place unlike any other. Ships arrived daily from every corner of the Mediterranean. Merchants carried spices from Arabia, ivory from Africa, grain from Egypt, silk from the East, and fine pottery from Greece. Along with these goods came stories, languages, customs, and books. The city's harbor never truly slept. From sunrise until long after sunset, sailors unloaded cargo, while traders bargained in crowded markets. The streets echoed with conversations in Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Phoenician, Latin, and many other languages. It was a city where different civilizations met every single day. The rulers of Egypt understood something revolutionary. Trade could bring wealth, but knowledge could bring immortality. This belief shaped Alexandria into far more than a commercial center. It became a city where scholars were treated almost like honored guests of the state. The Ptolemaic kings invested enormous resources in education. They invited philosophers from Athens, scientists from Asia Minor, poets from across the Greek world, doctors from Egypt, astronomers from distant kingdoms. Many accepted the invitation because Alexandria offered something rare: freedom to study, freedom to teach, freedom to ask difficult questions. The library became the center of this intellectual world, but collecting books was only the beginning. Every manuscript that entered Alexandria had to be examined, cataloged, and often translated. Imagine the work involved. Thousands upon thousands of handwritten scrolls arrived over the years. Each one had to be identified, its author recorded, its subject classified, its condition inspected. Copies carefully produced by skilled scribes. Entire rooms were devoted to copying texts. The scribes worked patiently, line after line, preserving knowledge that might otherwise disappear forever. Even a single mistake could change the meaning of an important passage. Accuracy mattered. Perfection mattered. Because every copy might become the only surviving version of a work. The librarians themselves became some of the most respected scholars in the ancient world. Their responsibilities went far beyond organizing shelves. They advised kings, conducted research, edited famous literary works, corrected ancient manuscripts, and supervised one of the largest collections of knowledge humanity had ever assembled. Some historians estimate that the library may have contained hundreds of thousands of scrolls at its height. The exact number remains unknown. Ancient writers gave different figures. Some claimed 400,000 scrolls. Others suggested 500,000. Still others believed the collection exceeded 700,000. Whether these numbers were completely accurate is impossible to prove. But even the lowest estimates describe an institution of extraordinary size. No other library in the ancient world came close. Its ambition was unmatched. The collection covered almost every subject imaginable: history, poetry, drama, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, geography, engineering, philosophy, politics, religion, natural science, agriculture, navigation, law, music, even practical manuals for daily life. Nothing was considered too unimportant to preserve. This universal approach made Alexandria unique. Knowledge itself became the treasure. One remarkable story illustrates the determination of the Ptolemaic rulers. Ancient writers claimed that every ship entering Alexandria's harbor was searched for books. Any manuscripts discovered were taken to the library. Official scribes created beautiful copies. Sometimes the copies were returned while the originals remained in Alexandria's collection. Modern historians debate whether this policy was always followed exactly as described. Perhaps the stories became exaggerated over time, yet they reveal something important. The rulers desperately wanted authentic manuscripts. Original works carried enormous prestige. Owning them meant owning history itself. Another famous example involved the official texts of Greek tragedies. According to ancient accounts, Athens agreed to lend precious manuscripts of the plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. The Egyptian king paid an enormous security deposit as a guarantee. When the copies were finished, he reportedly chose to forfeit the deposit rather than return the priceless originals. Whether completely true or partly legendary, the story reflects Alexandria's reputation. Books were valued more highly than gold. As the library expanded, scholars began producing entirely new knowledge rather than simply preserving old ideas. This was one of its greatest achievements. It was not merely a warehouse of scrolls. It was a living center of research. Mathematicians developed new theories. Astronomers refined observations of the planets. Doctors challenged traditional beliefs about disease. Geographers mapped lands that few people had ever visited. Linguists compared different languages and corrected ancient texts. Every generation built upon the work of those who came before. That is how civilization advances. Knowledge accumulates, ideas evolve, questions lead to better questions. The library encouraged this process unlike any institution before it. Yet beneath this extraordinary success lay hidden dangers. The library depended heavily upon royal support. Kings paid the scholars. Kings funded the buildings. Kings financed the collection of manuscripts. As long as wise rulers remained in power, the system flourished. But what would happen if future rulers cared less about scholarship? What if wars emptied the royal treasury? What if political struggles disrupted daily life? Knowledge often depends upon stability. When governments collapse, libraries become vulnerable. History has shown this repeatedly. The greatest collections of learning can disappear with astonishing speed when society itself begins to fracture. Alexandria would eventually face exactly these challenges. The Ptolemaic dynasty slowly weakened. Family rivalries became increasingly violent. Brothers fought brothers. Sisters married brothers to preserve royal bloodlines. Palace conspiracies became common. Assassinations were not unusual. Foreign powers began interfering in Egyptian politics. Among those powers, one nation steadily grew stronger: Rome. At first, Rome seemed distant. Its influence expanded gradually across the Mediterranean. Victory after victory transformed the Roman Republic into the dominant military force of the ancient world. Kingdoms that once considered themselves secure suddenly found themselves dependent upon Roman favor. Egypt watched these developments with growing concern. Its wealth attracted attention. Its grain fed millions. Its strategic location made it indispensable, and its magnificent capital remained one of the richest cities on earth. Alexandria had become both a jewel and a prize. As political tensions increased, no one could predict how dramatically the city's future would change. Within a few decades, Roman armies would march into Egyptian affairs. Civil war would erupt. One of history's most famous generals would arrive in Alexandria. His name was Julius Caesar. For generations, countless people have blamed him for destroying the library forever. But is that accusation supported by evidence? Or has history misunderstood what truly happened? Julius Caesar and the fire that changed history. By the middle of the 1st century BCE, Alexandria was still one of the greatest cities on earth. Its harbor was crowded with merchant ships from every corner of the Mediterranean. The lighthouse of Alexandria stood proudly above the coastline, guiding sailors safely into the city. The library remained a symbol of human knowledge, attracting scholars whose discoveries influenced generations. Yet beneath this brilliance, Egypt was no longer as stable as it had once been. The Ptolemaic dynasty had become trapped in endless struggles for power. Brothers fought sisters, advisors manipulated young rulers. Wealth and influence were concentrated in the royal court, where betrayal had become almost routine. At the center of this political storm stood two siblings, Cleopatra VII and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII. According to tradition, they ruled together. In reality, each wanted complete control of Egypt. Cleopatra was intelligent, highly educated, and fluent in several languages. She understood politics better than many experienced rulers twice her age. Her ambition was clear. She intended not only to survive, but to restore Egypt's strength. Ptolemy XIII, however, was surrounded by powerful advisors who feared Cleopatra's growing influence. They convinced the young king that sharing power with his sister threatened his authority. The conflict soon became open warfare. Cleopatra was forced to leave Alexandria. For a time, it appeared that her reign had ended before it had truly begun. Meanwhile, another conflict was shaking the Roman world. The Roman Republic had entered one of the greatest civil wars in its history. On one side stood Julius Caesar. On the other stood Pompey the Great, once Caesar's ally and one of Rome's most respected generals. Their struggle would determine the future of Rome. After suffering a devastating defeat, Pompey fled across the Mediterranean. He believed Egypt would offer him protection. Instead, he was betrayed. Hoping to gain Caesar's favor, advisors serving Ptolemy XIII murdered Pompey shortly after he arrived in Egypt. They believed they had solved their political problem. Instead, they created another. When Julius Caesar reached Alexandria in 48 BCE, he expected to confront his defeated rival. Instead, he was presented with Pompey's severed head. Far from celebrating, Caesar was reportedly horrified. Pompey had once been his son-in-law. Although they had become enemies, Caesar viewed the murder as dishonorable. The act convinced him that Egypt's political leadership could not be trusted. Rather than leaving immediately, Caesar decided to involve himself in Egypt's internal dispute. His arrival changed everything. Cleopatra understood that Rome's most powerful general represented her greatest opportunity. Legend tells one of history's most famous stories. Unable to enter the royal palace openly, Cleopatra secretly arranged to be brought before Caesar. According to ancient writers, she was wrapped inside a large carpet, or perhaps a linen sack, and carried into the palace as though she were nothing more than ordinary luggage. When the bundle was opened, Cleopatra emerged before the astonished Roman general. Whether every detail of this story is true remains uncertain. Ancient historians often enjoy dramatic storytelling, but the meeting itself certainly happened. It proved decisive. Caesar quickly recognized Cleopatra's intelligence. She, in turn, understood Caesar's political ambitions. Their alliance soon reshaped Egyptian history. Ptolemy XIII refused to accept Caesar's involvement. His supporters surrounded the royal quarter of Alexandria. What began as political negotiation quickly became military conflict. The city became a battlefield. Roman soldiers found themselves heavily outnumbered. Caesar controlled only part of Alexandria. Enemy forces occupied much of the city. The harbor became especially important. Control of the sea meant control of supplies and reinforcements. Caesar knew he could not allow the Egyptian fleet to fall into enemy hands. He made a desperate decision. His forces set fire to ships anchored in the harbor. The flames spread rapidly from vessel to vessel. Ancient ships were built largely from wood. Their sails, ropes, and cargo burned easily. Smoke rose above the harbor. Fire reflected across the Mediterranean waters. At first, the operation appeared successful. The Egyptian fleet could no longer be used against him. But fires rarely obey human plans. Strong winds carried burning debris towards nearby buildings. Warehouses filled with supplies caught fire. Storage areas burned. Parts of the harbor district suffered serious damage. Then came the question that historians continue debating more than 2,000 years later. Did those flames reach the Library of Alexandria? Ancient sources disagree. Some later writers claimed they did. Others never mentioned the library at all. Julius Caesar himself wrote about the Alexandrian War. He described military operations in considerable detail. Yet he never claimed to have burned the library. His silence has puzzled historians for centuries. Would Caesar have ignored such an enormous event? Perhaps the library remained untouched. One of the earliest writers to connect Caesar's fire with the library was Seneca, writing decades later. He suggested that around 40,000 scrolls were destroyed. Notice something important. He did not say the entire library vanished, only that many scrolls were lost. Other ancient writers gave different accounts. Some blamed Caesar directly. Others suggested warehouses containing books burned rather than the main library itself. Still, others ignored the story entirely. This disagreement matters. If eyewitnesses and early historians cannot agree, certainty becomes impossible. Modern historians examine every surviving source carefully. Many now believe Caesar's fire probably damaged part of Alexandria's book collections. Warehouses near the harbor may have stored manuscripts awaiting cataloging. Copies intended for scholars may have been lost. Thousands of scrolls could indeed have disappeared. But that does not necessarily mean the great library itself was destroyed. In fact, there is powerful evidence suggesting it survived. Several decades after Caesar's campaign, scholars continued working in Alexandria. Writers still referred to the library. Roman rulers later supported learning in the city. This would be difficult to explain if the entire institution had already vanished in 48 BCE. Perhaps Caesar's fire marked the beginning of the library's decline rather than its complete destruction. Or perhaps it caused only limited damage that was later repaired. The truth remains uncertain. History rarely provides simple answers. What is clear is that the image of Julius Caesar burning the world's greatest library in a single catastrophic blaze is probably an oversimplification. Reality appears far more complicated. Ancient cities often contained multiple libraries. Collections were divided among different buildings. Scrolls could be moved. Damaged collections could be replaced. New manuscripts constantly arrived. Even if thousands of scrolls were lost, much of the institution may have continued functioning. This possibility changes everything. Instead of searching for one dramatic moment, historians increasingly ask a different question. What if the library died slowly? What if Caesar's fire was only the first wound? What if later wars, political instability, financial decline, and religious conflict gradually destroyed what remained over several centuries? That theory explains far more evidence than the traditional story. Yet the mystery was far from over. Alexandria survived Caesar. Cleopatra remained queen. Rome eventually absorbed Egypt into its growing empire. For a time, the city continued shining as one of the greatest centers of learning on earth. But the challenges facing the library had only begun. The greatest threat was no longer a single fire. It was the changing world itself. Empires rise, empires fall, kings die, religions spread, priorities change. And sometimes, without anyone realizing it, humanity slowly allows its greatest treasures to disappear. After Caesar, the library refuses to die. If Julius Caesar had truly destroyed the entire library of Alexandria in 48 BCE, then its story should have ended there. But it didn't. This is one of the strongest reasons many modern historians doubt the popular legend. Long after Caesar left Egypt, references to scholars, books, and intellectual life in Alexandria continued to appear. The city remained one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. The library, or at least significant parts of its collections, appears to have survived. That raises an important question. If Caesar was not responsible for destroying the library completely, what happened next? After the Alexandrian War ended, Cleopatra regained her throne with Roman support. Her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, died during the conflict, and Cleopatra became the undisputed ruler of Egypt. For the next several years, Alexandria experienced another period of prosperity. Cleopatra was far more than a famous queen remembered for her relationship with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony. She was deeply educated. Ancient writers described her as a woman who spoke multiple languages without the need for interpreters. She studied philosophy, politics, medicine, and science. Unlike many rulers, she understood the value of knowledge. It is difficult to imagine that such a queen would ignore the greatest library in her own capital. Some historians even suggest that efforts may have been made to rebuild or expand collections that had been damaged during Caesar's campaign. Although direct evidence is limited, the idea fits Cleopatra's broader interest in promoting Alexandria as the intellectual heart of her kingdom. But history was moving toward another turning point. Rome's internal conflicts were not over. After Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, another struggle for power erupted. Mark Antony and Octavian eventually became rivals for control of the Roman world. Cleopatra allied herself with Mark Antony. Together they challenged Octavian. The conflict ended in one of history's most famous naval battles, the Battle of Actium, in 31 BCE. Antony and Cleopatra were defeated. The following year, both died. Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. Many feared this would mark the end of Alexandria's golden age. Surprisingly, the city continued to flourish. Rome quickly realized Egypt's enormous importance. Its grain fed millions. Its trade enriched the empire. Its scholars enhanced Rome's prestige. Rather than abandoning Alexandria, several Roman emperors supported its institutions. Students still traveled there to study. Teachers continued giving lectures. Scientists pursued new discoveries. The city remained famous throughout the Mediterranean. This continued intellectual activity suggests that important libraries still existed. Yet subtle changes were beginning. Under the Ptolemies, scholarship had been a royal mission. Knowledge itself had been considered a symbol of power. Roman emperors, however, had different priorities: military security, political stability, tax collection, administration. Learning remained respected, but it no longer occupied the same central place it once had. Funding could change with each emperor. Support depended on imperial politics. A single ruler's interests often determined whether cultural institutions prospered or struggled. Over time, this uncertainty affected Alexandria. Buildings required maintenance. Scrolls deteriorated naturally. Papyrus was fragile. Humidity, insects, mold, and simple aging slowly damaged manuscripts. Without constant copying, even the greatest collection could gradually disappear. Imagine thousands upon thousands of handwritten scrolls. Every few decades, many would need to be copied again. If fewer scribes were employed, if fewer scholars supervised preservation, if funding declined, the collection would slowly shrink. No dramatic fire would be necessary. time alone could become the enemy. Another challenge came from the changing nature of books themselves. For centuries, papyrus scrolls had dominated the ancient world. Eventually, a new format became increasingly popular: the codex. Instead of a long rolled scroll, the codex consisted of pages bound together along one side, much like modern books. It was easier to carry, easier to organize, easier to consult quickly. Many scholars preferred it. As this transition occurred, countless older scrolls needed to be copied into the new format. Not every text survived the process. Some were considered less important. Others had already become damaged. Some simply disappeared before anyone could preserve them. Knowledge can vanish quietly, without flames, without invaders, without dramatic battles. Sometimes it disappears because no one copies it. Alexandria also faced growing political unrest. Although Rome maintained overall control, local rebellions occasionally erupted. Different communities competed for influence. Ethnic tensions increased. Religious disagreements became more visible. The city that had once celebrated cultural diversity now experienced periods of conflict. Violence sometimes erupted in the streets. Public buildings suffered damage. Normal scholarly life became increasingly difficult. Yet the library, or at least parts of Alexandria's scholarly institutions, continued to exist. Evidence suggests that intellectual activity remained vibrant well into the 2nd century CE. Famous scholars still taught there. Medical schools attracted students. Philosophers debated complex ideas. Astronomers observed the heavens. The spirit of Alexandria had not vanished. But beneath the surface, the foundations were weakening. No institution can survive forever without consistent protection. Each generation inherits the responsibility of preserving knowledge. If that responsibility is neglected, decline becomes inevitable. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson of Alexandria. Civilizations rarely lose their greatest achievements all at once. They lose them gradually. A little funding disappears. A few manuscripts are neglected. One building falls into disrepair, another closes, a generation passes, then another. Eventually, people begin asking what happened. By then, the answer is often impossible to reconstruct completely. The Library of Alexandria may have entered exactly this kind of slow decline. But even greater challenges were approaching. During the 3rd century CE, the Roman Empire entered one of the darkest periods in its history. Civil wars erupted repeatedly. Emperors rose and fell with astonishing speed. Foreign invasions threatened imperial borders. Economic crises spread throughout the empire. Alexandria, despite its greatness, could not escape these upheavals. Soon, another emperor would wage war within the city itself. His campaign would leave large sections of Alexandria in ruins. Many historians believe this conflict dealt one of the most devastating blows the library had yet suffered. Was this the moment when the remaining collections were finally destroyed? Or did the library somehow survive once again? The mystery grows even deeper. Because the more we study Alexandria, the clearer one fact becomes. The library was not killed by a single event. It endured disaster after disaster. Each time it struggled to survive, and each time it emerged weaker than before, and with every passing century, the chances of saving humanity's greatest treasure grew smaller. The Roman Empire's darkest days. By the 3rd century CE, nearly 500 years had passed since the Library of Alexandria was founded. The world that had given birth to this extraordinary institution was almost unrecognizable. The brilliant age of the Ptolemies had long since disappeared. Cleopatra was gone. Julius Caesar was long dead. The Roman Republic had become the Roman Empire, stretching from Britain in the northwest to the deserts of the Middle East. It was the largest and most powerful empire the Mediterranean had ever known. But beneath its impressive appearance, cracks were beginning to spread. The 3rd century became one of the most chaotic periods in Roman history. Emperors came and went with astonishing speed. Many ruled for only a few months before being assassinated. Civil wars erupted repeatedly. Entire armies declared their own generals emperor. Economic problems grew worse each year. Foreign invasions threatened the empire's borders. Diseases spread through crowded cities. Confidence in Rome's future began to fade. Alexandria, despite its wealth and importance, could not remain untouched. The city still served as one of the empire's most valuable ports. Ships carrying Egyptian grain continued feeding millions across the Roman world. Trade remained active, but daily life became increasingly uncertain. Political unrest became common. Riots occasionally broke out. Different factions competed for power. Violence erupted more frequently than before. For scholars, these were difficult times. Learning flourished best during peace. War rarely cared about libraries. Books could not defend themselves. Scrolls could not flee. Knowledge depended upon people willing to protect it. One of the most important events occurred during the reign of Emperor Aurelian. By the year 270 CE, the Roman Empire faced multiple crises simultaneously. Several regions had broken away from imperial control. Among them was the Palmyrene Empire, ruled by the ambitious queen Zenobia. For a short time, Zenobia controlled Egypt, including Alexandria. This was a serious challenge to Rome. Aurelian refused to accept the loss. He launched a determined campaign to reunite the empire. His armies marched across the eastern provinces, defeating one opponent after another. Eventually, they reached Alexandria. The city once again became a battlefield. Street fighting broke out. Fortifications were attacked. Buildings suffered heavy damage. Ancient sources tell us that parts of Alexandria were devastated during these campaigns. One district mentioned specifically was called the Bruttium. This detail is especially important. Many historians believe the original Library of Alexandria had been located within or very near the Bruttium district. If that is true, Aurelian's reconquest may have inflicted catastrophic damage upon whatever remained of the original library. Unlike Caesar's fire, this event receives far less attention in popular history. Yet some scholars believe it represents a much stronger candidate for the library's destruction. Imagine centuries of accumulated knowledge surviving political turmoil, accidental fires, and changing rulers, only to be caught in the middle of urban warfare. Stone buildings could be rebuilt. Papyrus scrolls could not, even if soldiers did not intentionally target books. The destruction of surrounding buildings could easily erase entire collections. Unfortunately, ancient records remain incomplete. No surviving eyewitness clearly describes the library being destroyed during Aurelian's campaign. Instead, historians must piece together scattered evidence. The silence itself becomes part of the mystery. If the library had already declined significantly, chroniclers may no longer have considered it noteworthy. If only fragments remained, its loss might have passed almost unnoticed. History often records the victories of emperors more carefully than the disappearance of books. Another problem complicates the investigation. Many people imagine the library as a single, massive building. Reality was probably more complex. The institution likely included several collections housed in different locations. Some manuscripts may have been stored in the main library. Others may have belonged to temples. Still, others could have been kept in private scholarly collections. As a result, destruction may have occurred gradually. One collection disappeared during one conflict. Another survived for decades. Another was relocated over generations. The distinction between these collections blurred. Centuries later, people remembered only one legendary library. This makes identifying its final destruction extremely difficult. Even after Aurelian's campaign, intellectual life in Alexandria did not disappear completely. Teachers still worked in the city. Philosophers continued debating difficult questions. Medical traditions remained influential. This suggests that learning itself survived, even if specific buildings or collections had been lost. The spirit of Alexandria proved remarkably resilient. Knowledge has a way of finding new homes. Students become teachers. Teachers preserve ideas. Ideas spread beyond walls. Even when libraries fall, learning sometimes continues. Yet every loss mattered. Every destroyed manuscript reduced humanity's collective memory. Every neglected scroll represented knowledge that might never be recovered. Consider how fragile ancient writing truly was. Papyrus was made from the papyrus plant growing along the Nile. Although durable under favorable conditions, it was vulnerable to moisture, insects, fire, and age. Without continuous care, manuscripts slowly deteriorated. Unlike modern printed books, every replacement required painstaking manual copying. If wars reduced the number of scribes, if financial problems limited resources, if interest in older texts declined, thousands of works could quietly disappear. No dramatic flames, no famous conqueror, just slow decay. Historians often describe this process as cultural erosion. Civilizations rarely notice it while it happens. Each generation assumes someone else will preserve the past. Then one day, the past is gone. Alexandria stood at exactly this crossroads. Its scholars still possessed extraordinary knowledge, But the institutions supporting that knowledge were becoming increasingly fragile, and another powerful force was beginning to reshape the Roman world: religion. For centuries, the empire had worshipped many different gods. Temples honored Greek, Egyptian, Roman, and local deities. Alexandria itself contained magnificent religious buildings representing several traditions. Among them stood one of the most impressive temples ever constructed in Egypt, the Serapeum. Within this vast complex existed another famous library, often described as a daughter library connected to the original Library of Alexandria. If the original collection had suffered during earlier wars, perhaps this secondary library preserved many of its surviving works. But the Serapeum's future would become deeply entangled with one of the greatest religious transformations in world history. Old beliefs would clash with new faiths. Temples would become targets. Statues would be destroyed. Sacred buildings would fall. And many historians believe the fate of the Serapeum marked one of the final chapters in the long tragedy of Alexandria's libraries. Was this the moment when the last great collection finally disappeared? Or is the story even more complicated than that? The Serapeum, the last great library. By the late 3rd and 4th centuries CE, Alexandria was changing in ways its founders could never have imagined. For hundreds of years, the city had been a place where many religions existed side by side. Ancient Egyptian priests worshipped their traditional gods. Greek settlers honored Zeus, Athena, and Apollo. Romans brought their own religious customs. Jewish communities had lived in Alexandria for centuries, contributing greatly to its intellectual life. It was a city of many beliefs, but that balance would not last forever. A new religion was spreading rapidly across the Roman Empire: Christianity. At first, Christians were a small minority. Some Roman emperors viewed them with suspicion and even persecuted them. Yet despite these hardships, Christianity continued to grow. By the early 4th century, everything changed. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, granting legal protection to Christianity. For the first time, Christians could openly practice their faith without fear of persecution. This was a turning point in world history. Within a few generations, Christianity transformed from a persecuted religion into one of the empire's most powerful institutions. As Christianity expanded, many older pagan temples began losing their influence. Some closed naturally, others were abandoned. Still, others became symbols of religious conflict. Few places represented the old religious traditions more clearly than the Serapeum of Alexandria. The Serapeum was not merely a temple, it was one of the grandest buildings in the city. Dedicated to the god Serapis, a deity combining elements of Greek and Egyptian religion, it stood on a hill overlooking Alexandria. Visitors described magnificent columns, huge courtyards, beautiful statues, decorated halls. It was among the architectural wonders of the ancient world. But the Serapeum possessed another treasure. Many ancient writers mentioned that it contained an important collection of books. Some historians believe this was the famous Daughter Library of Alexandria. If true, then even after centuries of political turmoil, a substantial portion of the city's literary heritage may still have survived there. Exactly how many scrolls remained is impossible to know. Perhaps thousands, perhaps far fewer. Ancient sources do not provide clear numbers. Still, the existence of a scholarly collection within the Serapeum is supported by several historical references. For many researchers, this makes the temple critically important in the story of the Library of Alexandria. Then came the reign of Emperor Theodosius I. By the end of the 4th century, Christianity had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. Theodosius issued laws against many traditional pagan practices. Across the empire, numerous temples were closed. Some gradually fell into ruin. Others were converted into churches. In certain places, religious tensions turned violent. Alexandria became one of the most volatile cities in the empire. Its diverse population had long experienced periods of conflict. Now those tensions intensified. In 391 CE, events reached a breaking point. According to several ancient accounts, fighting erupted between pagans and Christians in Alexandria. The Serapeum became one of the central locations in the conflict. Eventually, imperial authorities ordered the temple closed. Christian groups entered the complex. The magnificent statue of Serapis was destroyed. The temple itself was heavily damaged. Many ancient writers described this event as a dramatic victory for Christianity over paganism. But what happened to the books? This question has puzzled historians for centuries. Some later writers claimed the library within the Serapeum was destroyed alongside the temple. Others said little or nothing about any collection of manuscripts. No surviving eyewitness provides a detailed inventory of what was lost. This silence creates enormous uncertainty. If books remained there, were they burned? Were they scattered? Were they removed beforehand? Were they transferred elsewhere? We simply do not know. Modern historians approach the evidence cautiously. Some argue that the Serapeum's destruction almost certainly resulted in the loss of whatever manuscripts remained inside. Others believe the library had already declined long before 391 CE. It is even possible that only a relatively small collection survived by that time. Regardless of the exact number of scrolls, one fact seems clear. The destruction of the Serapeum represented another devastating blow to Alexandria's intellectual heritage. The city had now endured centuries of warfare, political instability, economic decline, changing governments, religious conflict. Each crisis weakened institutions that depended upon peace and stability. The legendary library had survived longer than many realize, but every generation lost something. Every conflict erased another piece of humanity's memory. One common misconception deserves careful attention. Many popular stories claim that Christian mobs intentionally destroyed the entire Library of Alexandria in a single act of religious fanaticism. The historical evidence does not support such a simple conclusion. The Serapeum was certainly destroyed. Ancient pagan statues were smashed. The temple ceased functioning. But whether this event eliminated the last great library remains uncertain. Most historians today believe the process was much more gradual. By 391 CE, the original library founded by the Ptolemies may already have disappeared. The Serapeum likely preserved only part of Alexandria's scholarly tradition. Its destruction was tragic, but it was probably one chapter in a much longer story. This distinction matters. History becomes misleading when we search for a single villain. The disappearance of the library appears to have resulted from centuries of accumulated losses rather than one dramatic catastrophe. Still, the mystery was not over. Several centuries later, another explanation emerged. According to a famous medieval tradition, the final destruction occurred after Muslim armies conquered Alexandria in 642 CE. The story claimed that the conquerors burned the remaining books because they were unnecessary. It became one of the most widely repeated tales in history. But was it true? Or was it created hundreds of years after the events it described? The answer may surprise you, because when historians investigated the evidence, they discovered something unexpected. The Arab conquest. Theory, history, or legend? By the year 642 CE, the world had changed beyond recognition. More than 900 years had passed since Alexander the Great founded Alexandria. The mighty Ptolemaic kingdom had vanished centuries earlier. The Roman Empire that once ruled Egypt had transformed into the Byzantine Empire. Ancient pagan temples had largely disappeared. Christianity had become deeply rooted throughout Egypt. And now a new force was reshaping the Middle East. The Islamic Caliphate. Following the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632 CE, Muslim armies expanded rapidly across the region. Within only a few years, they defeated powerful empires that had dominated the Near East for centuries. One of their next objectives was Egypt. The campaign was led by the brilliant military commander Amr ibn al-As. His army crossed into Egypt and steadily advanced toward Alexandria. The Byzantine defenders resisted fiercely, but after months of fighting, the city finally surrendered. Alexandria had entered a new chapter of its long history. For many people, this is where the story of the library reaches its dramatic conclusion. According to a famous legend, Amr ibn al-As discovered the surviving Library of Alexandria after conquering the city. Unsure what to do with its enormous collection of books, he supposedly wrote to the Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab asking for instructions. The reply, according to the story, became one of the most famous quotations in history. If these books agree with the Quran, they are unnecessary. If they disagree with the Quran, they are harmful. Therefore, destroy them. The legend continues by claiming that thousands of books were distributed among Alexandria's public bathhouses and burned as fuel for many months. It is a dramatic story, simple, memorable, powerful. For centuries, countless books repeated it as historical fact. But is it true? Modern historians have examined this claim with extraordinary care. The results are striking. The biggest problem is the evidence, or rather the lack of it. The Muslim conquest of Egypt was an event recorded by many early historians. Christian writers described it. Muslim historians described it. Byzantine sources mentioned it. Yet none of the earliest accounts says anything about the burning of the library. Not one. This silence is difficult to ignore. If one of history's greatest libraries had truly been destroyed during the conquest, why did contemporary writers fail to mention such an extraordinary event? The famous story appears only centuries later. The earliest known version comes from writers living roughly 600 years after the conquest. That enormous gap raises serious doubts. Historians generally trust sources written close to the events they describe more than stories appearing many centuries afterward. The later a story emerges, the greater the possibility that legends, political motives, or misunderstandings influenced it. Another problem concerns the library itself. By 642 CE, what exactly remained? Earlier evidence suggests that the original library had already suffered repeated disasters. Caesar's campaign, urban warfare, centuries of neglect, the destruction of the Serapeum, political instability, religious conflict. Most modern scholars believe the Great Library, founded by the Ptolemies, had ceased to exist long before the Muslim conquest. There may have been private collections, church libraries, scholarly manuscripts, but the legendary institution itself was probably already gone. This makes the traditional story even less convincing. Some historians believe the legend arose because later generations wanted a simple explanation for a much more complicated historical process. People often prefer dramatic endings. A single villain, a single fire, a single moment. Reality rarely behaves that way. Others suggest the story may have been created during later political and religious disputes. Throughout medieval history, different civilizations sometimes accused one another of destroying ancient knowledge. Such stories could serve political purposes. They could justify hostility or reinforce existing prejudices. Without reliable contemporary evidence, historians remain skeptical. Today, the overwhelming majority of specialists reject the traditional story of Caliph Umar ordering the destruction of the library. That does not mean every manuscript in Alexandria survived the conquest. Wars always bring destruction. Some books may certainly have been lost. Buildings may have suffered damage. Private collections may have disappeared. But the famous tale of bathhouses burning books for months is almost certainly legendary rather than historical. Ironically, the early Islamic world became one of history's greatest protectors of knowledge. Within a few generations, scholars across the Islamic world translated and preserved countless Greek, Persian, Indian, and Roman texts. Centers of learning flourished in cities such as Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, and Cordoba. Many classical works that survive today reached Europe through Arabic translations. Without those scholars, important writings by Aristotle, Euclid, Galen, and many others might have vanished forever. History is full of such unexpected twists. The civilization often accused of destroying ancient knowledge became one of its greatest guardians. This reminds us why careful historical research matters. Popular stories are not always accurate. Evidence must come first. By now, one conclusion is becoming increasingly clear. The question, who burned the Library of Alexandria, may itself be misleading. Perhaps no single person did. Perhaps no single fire ended its existence. Instead, the library may have died slowly across centuries. A little was lost during Caesar's campaign. More disappeared through neglect. Additional collections suffered during Roman civil wars. The Serapeum was destroyed. Old scrolls decayed. Fewer scribes copied aging manuscripts. Political priorities shifted. Knowledge gradually scattered across the ancient world. No single catastrophe, only a long chain of smaller tragedies. And sometimes that kind of loss is even more heartbreaking, because it reminds us that civilizations do not always lose their greatest achievements through sudden disasters. Sometimes they simply stop protecting them. The mystery of Alexandria is therefore not only about the past. It is also a warning for every generation. Libraries survive only if people value knowledge enough to preserve it. The evidence, who really bears the blame? For more than 2,000 years, one question has echoed through history. Who burned the Library of Alexandria? It sounds like a simple question, but after examining the surviving evidence, historians have discovered that the answer is anything but simple. There is no ancient document that clearly says, this person destroyed the library. There is no eyewitness account describing the final day of the library. There is no official record announcing its complete destruction. Instead, history leaves us with scattered clues, small fragments, conflicting reports, silence where we wish there were answers, like detectives investigating an ancient mystery. Historians must examine every piece of evidence and ask which explanation fits best. The first suspect is, of course, Julius Caesar. His name has become almost inseparable from the legend. In 48 BCE, during the Alexandrian War, Caesar ordered ships in the harbor to be burned. Ancient writers agree that a large fire spread through parts of the city. Some later historians claimed that thousands of scrolls were destroyed. But did that fire consume the entire library? The evidence suggests otherwise. Several decades after Caesar's campaign, Alexandria was still recognized as an important center of scholarship. Scholars continued working there. Roman emperors still supported learning. References to libraries in Alexandria continued to appear. If the entire institution had vanished in 48 BCE, these later references would be difficult to explain. Most modern historians therefore believe Caesar's fire probably caused serious damage, but not complete destruction. The second possibility involves gradual decline. Unlike a palace or fortress, a library cannot survive without constant attention. Books age. Papyrus becomes brittle. Ink fades. Insects destroy manuscripts. Moisture damages scrolls. Every generation must preserve what the previous generation created. If rulers lose interest, if funding disappears, if scribes become fewer, the collection slowly shrinks. No dramatic catastrophe is required. This explanation may sound less exciting than stories of enormous fires. But history often works this way. Great institutions sometimes disappear quietly. Their decline goes almost unnoticed until it is too late. The third major theory centers on Emperor Aurelian. During the late 3rd century, Alexandria became a battlefield once again. The emperor fought to reclaim Egypt after the rebellion led by Queen Zenobia. Ancient sources describe extensive destruction, especially in the Bruttium district. Many scholars believe the original library stood within this area. If so, Aurelian's campaign could have destroyed whatever remained of the original institution. The evidence is indirect. No surviving writer explicitly states that the library burned. Yet geographically and historically, the theory makes considerable sense. The fourth theory concerns the destruction of the Serapeum. By the late 4th century, the Serapeum had become one of Alexandria's most important religious and cultural centers. It almost certainly contained a significant collection of books. When religious conflict led to the temple's destruction in 391 CE, many historians believe those manuscripts were lost. Again, uncertainty remains. How many books survived there? How large was the collection? Were important manuscripts removed before the temple fell? No one can answer these questions with confidence. But the event undoubtedly represented another serious blow to Alexandria's intellectual heritage. Finally comes the famous Arab conquest theory. For centuries, countless people believed Muslim forces destroyed the library after conquering Alexandria in 642 CE. Yet this explanation collapses under historical examination. The earliest accounts of the conquest never mention such an event. The famous story appears only hundreds of years later. Most modern historians reject it as a legend rather than reliable history. Ironically, early Islamic scholars preserved many classical texts that might otherwise have disappeared forever. As we compare these theories, a remarkable pattern emerges. Each one explains part of the story. None explains all of it. Perhaps that is because the library did not die once. Perhaps it died many times. Imagine a magnificent tree. One storm breaks several branches. Years later, disease weakens the trunk. Another storm tears away more limbs. Eventually, insects attack the roots. One morning, the tree finally falls. Which event killed it? The first storm, the disease, the insects, the final collapse? The truthful answer is all of them. The Library of Alexandria may have shared the same fate. Caesar's fire caused damage. Political instability weakened royal support. Wars devastated parts of the city. Economic decline reduced maintenance. Religious conflicts destroyed important buildings. Time itself erased fragile manuscripts. No single event alone ended the library. Together, they slowly accomplished what no individual conqueror could. This understanding changes how we view history. Civilizations rarely lose knowledge because of one villain. Knowledge disappears when generations fail to protect it. That lesson remains painfully relevant today. Although we now store information digitally, modern knowledge faces different dangers. Hard drives fail, websites disappear, digital formats become obsolete. Wars still destroy archives. Natural disasters still threaten museums. Political censorship still removes books. The methods have changed. The risk has not. The tragedy of Alexandria reminds us that preserving knowledge requires continuous effort. Every generation inherits humanity's memory. Every generation decides what survives. And every generation bears responsibility for passing that memory to the next. Perhaps that is why the story of the library continues to fascinate people around the world. It is not merely about ancient scrolls, it is about us, about whether we value ideas enough to protect them, about whether curiosity can survive conflict, about whether civilization learns from its mistakes. The Library of Alexandria may be gone, but the dream that created it has never disappeared. Around the world, libraries, universities, museums, and archives continue the same mission begun more than 2,000 years ago: to gather knowledge, to preserve it, and to share it freely with future generations. Yet one mystery remains. If the library is gone forever, what exactly was lost? How many masterpieces vanished without leaving a trace? How many discoveries disappeared before anyone else could read them? How different might human history have been if those scrolls had survived? Those questions lead us into one of the most fascinating parts of the entire story, because sometimes what we don't know is even more powerful than what we do. The lost knowledge. What vanished forever? Imagine walking into the greatest library the ancient world had ever known. Towering shelves are filled with countless papyrus scrolls. Scholars move quietly between the rows, searching for works written centuries earlier. Scribes sit at wooden tables, carefully copying manuscripts one line at a time. Philosophers debate ideas that challenge everything people think they know. Mathematicians draw perfect geometric figures. Astronomers compare observations of distant stars. Physicians discuss new treatments for disease. Now imagine that all of it is gone, not just the building, not just the shelves, but the knowledge itself. Thousands upon thousands of voices, permanently silenced. This is the true tragedy of the Library of Alexandria. The greatest loss was never the stone walls. It was the ideas that disappeared with them. Historians have often wondered what those lost scrolls contained. Unfortunately, because they no longer exist, we can only make educated guesses. Some works are known because later writers quoted small portions of them. Others survive only because someone mentioned their titles. Many disappeared so completely that we do not even know they ever existed. This is perhaps the saddest part of the mystery. We cannot mourn books whose names have been forgotten. Ancient Greek literature provides one striking example. Today, people still read the works of Homer, Sophocles, Euripides, and Plato. But these famous authors represent only a tiny fraction of ancient literature. Historians estimate that hundreds of Greek playwrights once wrote thousands of tragedies and comedies. Only a small percentage survives. The rest vanished over time. Perhaps some copies once rested safely on the shelves of Alexandria. Perhaps they disappeared forever when those collections were lost. History will never tell us.
The same is true for philosophy. The ancient world produced countless thinkers whose writings no longer exist.
Sometimes only a sentence survives because another author quoted it. Imagine trying to understand a great philosopher after reading only one paragraph from an entire lifetime of work. That is the challenge historians face. Science may have suffered even greater losses. Alexandria gathered scholars from across the Mediterranean. Many conducted original research. Some observed the movements of planets, others measured the earth. Doctors carefully studied anatomy. Engineers designed remarkable machines. Mathematicians developed new theories. Not every discovery changed history immediately. Some ideas may have been forgotten before later civilizations could build upon them. Consider Eratosthenes. Working in Alexandria, he calculated the circumference of the Earth with astonishing accuracy, using shadows, geometry, and careful observation. His achievement demonstrated the extraordinary level of scientific thinking possible in the ancient world. If one scholar could accomplish this, what might others have discovered? Could there have been astronomical observations now lost? Medical treatments forgotten? Engineering techniques abandoned? The possibility continues to inspire historians. Of course, we must also avoid exaggeration. Popular stories sometimes claim that the library contained advanced technologies far beyond its time. Some people imagine lost machines, secret maps, or scientific knowledge that would have transformed modern civilization overnight.
There is no historical evidence supporting such extraordinary claims. The real loss is already tragic enough. We do not need myths to appreciate it. The surviving evidence suggests the library preserved the accumulated knowledge of many civilizations. Greek, Egyptian, Persian, Babylonian, perhaps Indian and other traditions as well. Each culture contributed something unique. Astronomy, mathematics, medicine, history, religion, literature, agriculture, navigation, law, music, languages. The library attempted to bring all these traditions together under one roof. It was one of humanity's earliest efforts to create a truly universal collection of knowledge. That dream remains remarkable even today. Another fascinating question concerns ancient history itself. Many civilizations recorded events long before the rise of Greece and Rome. Egypt kept records stretching back thousands of years. Babylonian astronomers carefully observed the skies. Priests preserved religious traditions. Kings recorded military campaigns. If copies of those ancient documents disappeared, entire chapters of human history disappeared with them. Modern archaeologists continue discovering inscriptions buried beneath sand or hidden inside ruined temples. Each new discovery reminds us how much has already been lost. Sometimes a single surviving fragment completely changes historians' understanding of the ancient world. Imagine what hundreds of thousands of missing scrolls might have revealed. Yet despite these losses, knowledge did not vanish completely. Ideas have a remarkable ability to survive. Scholars carried books when they traveled. Students copied manuscripts. Teachers passed information from one generation to another. Private collections preserved works that never belonged to the library. Other cities maintained libraries of their own. Pergamon, Athens, Rome, Antioch, Constantinople. Centuries later, scholars in the Islamic world translated many Greek scientific and philosophical texts into Arabic. During the Renaissance, European scholars rediscovered numerous classical works through those translations. Knowledge scattered. It did not disappear entirely. In many ways, the spirit of Alexandria escaped its walls. Its greatest ideas traveled farther than anyone could have imagined. Perhaps that is the library's most enduring legacy. Not the building, not the shelves, but the belief that knowledge should be collected, preserved, and shared. Today, nearly every major library in the world follows that same principle. Universities continue the tradition begun more than 2,000 years ago. Researchers build upon earlier discoveries. Students learn from teachers. Books inspire new books. Ideas generate new ideas. The dream lives on. Still, one question continues to haunt historians. If the library disappeared gradually over centuries, why does the legend of a single catastrophic fire remain so powerful? Why do people continue searching for one person to blame? The answer reveals something profound about human nature. We prefer simple stories, heroes, villains, clear endings. History rarely provides them. The real story of the Library of Alexandria is more complicated, and perhaps even more meaningful, because it reminds us that civilization is fragile. Knowledge survives only when people choose to preserve it. Every manuscript copied, every archive protected, every library funded, every teacher respected, every student encouraged. These ordinary actions shape the future far more than we often realize. Myths versus reality. Separating fact from fiction. For centuries, the Library of Alexandria has inspired historians, writers, filmmakers, and storytellers. The more famous the library became, the more legends grew around it. Some of those stories contain a small grain of truth. Others are almost entirely fictional. To understand what really happened, we must separate myth from historical evidence. The first and most famous myth is that the library was destroyed in a single night by one enormous fire. This is the version most people know. A vast building, hundreds of thousands of scrolls, towering flames, everything gone before sunrise. It is an unforgettable image, but the historical evidence simply does not support it. No ancient eyewitness describes such a dramatic event. Instead, the surviving records suggest a long series of disasters spread across several centuries. Caesar's fire, political instability, urban warfare, economic decline, neglect, religious conflict, natural decay. Each contributed to the library's disappearance. Rather than one catastrophic ending, the library likely experienced a slow death. The second myth claims Julius Caesar intentionally burned the library. This story has appeared in countless books and documentaries. Yet the evidence paints a different picture. During the Alexandrian War, Caesar ordered ships in the harbor to be set on fire. Those flames almost certainly spread into nearby parts of the city. Some ancient writers mention the loss of books. But there is no convincing evidence that Caesar deliberately targeted the library itself. If books were destroyed, they were probably unintended casualties of military operations. That distinction matters. History should judge people based on evidence, not legend. The third myth blames Christians alone. The destruction of the Serapeum in 391 CE undoubtedly represented a tragic loss for Alexandria. The magnificent temple was demolished. Ancient religious statues were destroyed. If a library still existed there, many manuscripts may have disappeared as well. However, by that time, the original library, founded centuries earlier, had almost certainly already suffered severe decline. The Serapeum was not necessarily the entire library. It may have preserved only part of Alexandria's scholarly tradition. Reducing the entire story to one religious conflict oversimplifies centuries of history. The fourth myth blames the Muslim conquest. As we discovered earlier, the famous story involving Caliph Umar appears only in sources written hundreds of years after the conquest itself. Earlier historians remain completely silent. For this reason, most modern scholars reject the story as unreliable. The library was almost certainly gone, or at least no longer functioning as the legendary institution people imagined, long before Muslim armies entered Alexandria. Another popular myth claims the library contained secret knowledge that could have transformed the modern world overnight. People sometimes speak of impossible inventions, lost technologies, ancient machines more advanced than modern science, maps proving impossible voyages, even magical texts. These ideas make entertaining stories, but they are not supported by historical evidence. The scholars of Alexandria were brilliant. Their achievements in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy remain astonishing. Yet they were still people of the ancient world. Their greatness came from careful observation, logical thinking, and relentless curiosity, not supernatural secrets. The real accomplishments of Alexandria are impressive enough without adding fantasy. One myth, however, contains an important truth. People often say the destruction of the library set humanity back hundreds of years. That statement is difficult to measure. History does not follow a straight line. Knowledge spreads in many directions at once. Even if Alexandria had survived intact, wars, political change, and social transformation would still have influenced civilization. Yet there is no doubt that every lost manuscript reduced the amount of knowledge available to future generations. Some discoveries had to be made again centuries later. Some literary masterpieces disappeared forever. Some historical records were never recovered. The loss was real, even if we cannot calculate its exact impact. Another misunderstanding concerns the size of the library. Ancient writers described enormous collections containing hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Modern historians debate these numbers. Were there really 700,000 scrolls? Perhaps, perhaps not. Ancient authors sometimes exaggerated to emphasize greatness. Even if the true number was much smaller, the library would still have ranked among the largest collections of the ancient world. Its importance does not depend on an exact figure. Its ambition alone made it extraordinary. There is also a misconception that Alexandria was unique. In reality, the ancient world contained many libraries. Pergamon possessed a famous collection. Rome maintained important libraries. Private scholars accumulated valuable manuscripts. Temples often preserved sacred texts. What made Alexandria different was its vision. It attempted to collect all human knowledge, not merely local traditions, not only one language, not just one civilization, everything. That dream has inspired libraries ever since. Perhaps the greatest myth of all is hidden within the very question we continue asking. Who burned the Library of Alexandria? The question assumes there must be one answer, one culprit, one decisive event. But after centuries of research, historians increasingly reach a different conclusion. The library probably had many enemies. Fire damaged it, war weakened it, politics neglected it, time eroded it, religious conflict harmed it, changing priorities abandoned it. No single person destroyed the library. Entire generations failed to preserve it. That conclusion may sound less dramatic, but it is probably closer to the truth. And in many ways, it carries a deeper lesson. Because if one person destroys knowledge, we can blame that individual. But if an entire civilization gradually allows knowledge to disappear, then responsibility belongs to everyone. That idea should make us pause. Every generation inherits books, ideas, discoveries, languages, histories, and cultures created by those who came before. Every generation chooses what to protect, and every generation decides what future generations will inherit. The Library of Alexandria is no longer just an ancient mystery. It has become a symbol, a reminder that civilization depends upon memory. Without memory, knowledge fades. Without knowledge, progress slows. Without preservation, even the greatest achievements can vanish. The verdict: solving history's greatest mystery. After traveling through nearly 1,000 years of history, we arrive at the moment everyone has been waiting for. Who burned the Library of Alexandria? At first glance, it seems like history should provide a simple answer. A name, a date, a single event. Instead, what we find is something far more complicated, and perhaps far more meaningful. Let us examine the evidence one final time. When the library was founded under the Ptolemaic kings, it represented one of the boldest intellectual projects ever attempted. Its mission was extraordinary: to gather every written work that could be found across the known world. For generations, that dream succeeded. Scholars arrived from distant lands. Books poured into Alexandria's harbor. Scribes copied manuscripts day and night. Mathematicians, physicians, astronomers, philosophers, historians, and poets worked side by side. The library became more than a building. It became humanity's memory. Then history changed. Political struggles weakened Egypt. Rome became increasingly powerful. Civil wars reached Alexandria. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar ordered ships in the harbor to be burned. The fire spread. Some ancient writers mention the destruction of books. Modern historians generally agree that important collections were probably damaged. But the evidence also suggests that scholarly life continued afterward. The library, or at least significant parts of it, did not vanish overnight. Years became decades. Decades became centuries. Kings disappeared. Roman emperors replaced them. Economic crises spread across the empire. Maintenance declined. Scrolls aged. Some were copied. Many were not. Knowledge slowly became more fragile. Then came new wars. During Emperor Aurelian's campaign in the 3rd century, large sections of Alexandria were devastated. If the original library still occupied the Bruchion district, this conflict may have destroyed much of what remained. Again, certainty escapes us. The evidence is incomplete. Later, religious conflict transformed the city. The Serapeum fell. Ancient temples disappeared. Any surviving collections housed there may also have been lost. But by then, the great institution founded centuries earlier had almost certainly already declined. Finally came the Arab conquest. For generations, many believed this was the library's final chapter. Yet the historical evidence simply does not support the famous legend. The earliest reliable sources say nothing about a great burning of books. Most specialists now reject that story. When all the evidence is placed together, a clear picture begins to emerge. The library did not have one executioner. It had many. Fire wounded it. War weakened it. Politics neglected it. Time eroded it. Religious conflict damaged parts of its legacy. Nature quietly destroyed fragile manuscripts that no one copied. Each generation inherited a slightly smaller collection than the one before. Eventually, there was no library left to destroy. Only memories. This conclusion may disappoint those hoping for a dramatic ending. But history often refuses to satisfy our desire for simple stories. Reality is usually more complicated and often more tragic. Because if one conqueror had destroyed the library in a single act, we could point to one villain, one decision, one terrible mistake. Instead, Alexandria teaches a harder lesson. Knowledge disappears when societies stop protecting it. Sometimes through violence, sometimes through neglect, sometimes because no one realizes what is being lost until it has already vanished. Look around the modern world. Libraries still exist. Museums preserve priceless artifacts. Universities continue researching ancient civilizations. Archives protect documents that future historians will one day study. Digital technology allows billions of pages to be stored in forms unimaginable to the scholars of Alexandria. Yet new dangers have also appeared. Digital files become corrupted, websites disappear, electronic formats become obsolete. Wars continue destroying cultural heritage. Natural disasters threaten archives. Political censorship removes books. The challenges have changed. The responsibility has not. Every civilization faces the same choice: protect knowledge or risk losing it. Perhaps this is why the story of Alexandria continues capturing imaginations after more than 2,000 years. It is not merely about an ancient building, it is about every generation's relationship with learning. The library became a symbol because its mission never truly ended. Around the world, countless institutions continue pursuing the same dream: to gather knowledge, to preserve it, to make it available for everyone. That dream belongs not to one nation or one civilization. It belongs to humanity itself. In the end, perhaps we have been asking the wrong question all along. Instead of asking, who burned the Library of Alexandria? Perhaps we should ask, how do we ensure that humanity never loses its knowledge again? That question matters far more, because unlike the people who lived 2,000 years ago, we still have the opportunity to protect what we know. The greatest tribute we can pay to the scholars of Alexandria is not merely remembering their library. It is continuing their work, reading, learning, questioning, teaching, preserving, sharing. As long as those values survive, the spirit of the Library of Alexandria has never truly disappeared. Its walls may be gone. Its scrolls may have turned to dust. Its halls may have fallen silent. But its greatest idea remains alive. The belief that knowledge is humanity's greatest treasure. And that is a legacy no fire could ever completely destroy. The legacy that outlived the flames. For centuries, people have searched for the person responsible for destroying the Library of Alexandria. But as our journey has shown, the real story is far more complex than a single fire or a single conqueror. By the time the ancient library disappeared, it had already survived wars, political revolutions, changing rulers, and religious transformation. It had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, the birth of empires, and the arrival of entirely new civilizations. Yet even after its buildings were gone, something extraordinary remained: its legacy. The Library of Alexandria was never important simply because it contained hundreds of thousands of scrolls. It was important because it represented an idea that had never been attempted on such a scale before. The idea that all human knowledge deserved to be collected. That wisdom should not belong to one city, one nation, or one culture. That every civilization had something valuable to contribute. This vision made Alexandria unlike any other place in the ancient world. Greek philosophers studied Egyptian mathematics. Egyptian priests preserved traditions that stretch back thousands of years. Babylonian astronomy influenced new generations of scholars. Poets, historians, physicians, and scientists exchanged ideas freely, creating an environment where knowledge could grow through cooperation rather than isolation. This exchange of ideas became the library's greatest achievement. Even when manuscripts disappeared, the ideas they contained often survived because students carried them to other cities. Teachers passed them to new generations. Scholars copied important works before the originals were lost. Knowledge spread across the Mediterranean like light from a single flame. That is why the complete destruction of the library never meant the complete destruction of learning. Many important texts escaped Alexandria long before its decline. Copies reached Athens. Others traveled to Rome. Some found their way into private collections. Centuries later, scholars translated surviving Greek works into Syriac and Arabic, ensuring that many ancient discoveries continued influencing future civilizations. Without those efforts, much of classical philosophy, mathematics, and medicine might have vanished forever. History often remembers the library as a symbol of loss, but perhaps it should also be remembered as a symbol of resilience. Ideas are remarkably difficult to destroy. Buildings can burn, scrolls can decay, empires can collapse, but knowledge has a way of surviving through people. As long as someone remembers an idea, teaches it, or writes it down again, that knowledge continues living. This is one of humanity's greatest strengths. Every generation inherits the discoveries of those who came before. Every generation has the opportunity to add something new. The scholars of Alexandria understood this better than anyone. They knew that no individual could learn everything. But together, humanity could continue expanding the boundaries of knowledge. Their library became the physical expression of that belief. Although the ancient building disappeared, its influence never truly ended. Today, every modern library follows the same basic mission: to collect knowledge, to organize it, to preserve it, and to make it available for everyone. Universities around the world continue the same tradition. Researchers build upon earlier discoveries. Students learn from books written by people they will never meet. Scientists improve theories developed centuries earlier. Every new discovery becomes another chapter in humanity's shared story. In many ways, we are all continuing the work that began in Alexandria more than 2,000 years ago. Perhaps that is why the library still captures our imagination. It reminds us that civilization is built not only through armies, monuments, or wealth. It is built through curiosity, through questions, through learning, through the determination to understand the world a little better than the generation before. The tragedy of Alexandria was not simply the loss of books. It was the reminder that knowledge requires protection. Without preservation, even the greatest achievements can disappear. Without education, wisdom fades. Without curiosity, progress slows. Every civilization must decide whether knowledge is worth protecting. The people of Alexandria answered that question with extraordinary ambition. They attempted to preserve the entire intellectual heritage of the known world. Even though they ultimately failed to save every scroll, they succeeded in creating one of history's most inspiring ideas. That idea continues living today. Every time someone enters a library, every time a teacher shares knowledge with students, every time a scientist publishes new research, every time a reader opens a book hoping to learn something new, the Library of Alexandria lives on, not in stone walls or papyrus scrolls, but in humanity's endless pursuit of knowledge. And perhaps that is the greatest victory of all. Because while fires can destroy buildings, they cannot destroy the human desire to learn. As long as that desire survives, the true spirit of the Library of Alexandria will never be lost. The search for the lost library. For more than 2,000 years, historians, archaeologists, and explorers have asked another fascinating question. If the Library of Alexandria was real, where exactly did it stand? Surprisingly, no one knows with complete certainty. That may seem impossible. How could one of the most famous buildings in history simply disappear? The answer lies beneath the streets of modern Alexandria. The city you see today is not the same city that existed during the time of Alexander the Great or Cleopatra. Over the centuries, earthquakes shook the region. Powerful tidal waves struck the coastline. New buildings rose on top of older ones. Roads were rebuilt. Harbors changed shape. Entire neighborhoods vanished beneath layers of stone and sand. Ancient Alexandria was slowly buried beneath the modern city. This makes archaeological excavation extremely difficult. Unlike many ancient sites located in open deserts, Alexandria is still a thriving city where millions of people live and work. Archaeologists cannot simply remove modern buildings to search for the past hidden underneath. Even so, remarkable discoveries have been made. Divers exploring the waters off Alexandria's coast have uncovered enormous stone blocks, broken statues, columns, sphinxes, and the remains of royal palaces that once stood near the harbor. These underwater ruins confirm that large sections of the ancient city disappeared beneath the sea after earthquakes and coastal collapse. Some researchers believe that valuable buildings connected to the royal quarter may also lie beneath those waters. Could the library itself be among them? No one knows. So far, no excavation has uncovered a building that can be identified with certainty as the original Library of Alexandria. Several possible locations have been proposed. One theory places the library inside the royal district known as the Bruchion. Ancient writers often connected the library with the Museion, the great research institution supported by the Ptolemaic kings. Since the Museion appears to have been located within the royal quarter, many historians believe the library stood nearby. If this theory is correct, later wars may have completely destroyed the site. Another theory suggests that parts of the library's collections were spread across several buildings rather than concentrated in one enormous structure. If true, archaeologists may never find a single Library of Alexandria. Instead, they may discover smaller collections, storage rooms, lecture halls, and administrative buildings scattered throughout the ancient city. This possibility would explain why the library seems to appear and disappear in different historical accounts. The institution may have been much larger and more complex than modern imagination suggests. Archaeology has also revealed something equally important. Alexandria was a city of constant construction. Each new ruler added temples, theaters, palaces, gardens, and public buildings. Older structures were often dismantled, so their stones could be reused elsewhere. Over hundreds of years, even magnificent buildings gradually disappeared. The library may have suffered the same fate. Its columns reused in churches, its stones incorporated into city walls, its foundations buried beneath newer streets. Without inscriptions clearly identifying the site, certainty remains impossible. Still, archaeologists continue searching. Every excavation offers another clue. Every ancient inscription adds another piece to the puzzle. Every newly discovered manuscript helps historians better understand the intellectual world that once flourished in Alexandria. Technology has transformed this search. Ground-penetrating radar allows researchers to examine buried structures without digging. Satellite imaging reveals patterns invisible from ground level. Underwater archaeology continues mapping the submerged ruins of the ancient harbor. Digital reconstruction helps historians imagine how the royal district may once have looked. Although the original library has never been found, these discoveries bring us closer to understanding the city that created it. Perhaps the greatest discovery, however, has nothing to do with buildings. It is the realization that the library's true importance never depended upon its physical location. Its greatest achievement was not its walls, it was its purpose: to preserve the accumulated knowledge of humanity. That mission continues today in libraries, museums, universities, and digital archives around the world. In a sense, every place dedicated to learning carries a small part of Alexandria's legacy. The search for the library, therefore, is about more than archaeology. It is about remembering why it mattered. Because civilizations are remembered not only for the wars they fought or the monuments they built, but for the knowledge they preserved. The scholars of Alexandria understood that ideas could outlive kings. They believed that every book saved was a gift to the future. More than 2,000 years later, their belief continues to inspire us. The library may never be fully recovered. Its scrolls may never return, and its halls may remain hidden forever beneath the streets and waters of Alexandria. But its story still challenges us with one timeless question. If future generations looked back at our civilization thousands of years from now, would they say we protected humanity's knowledge or allowed it to disappear? That question is just as important today as it was in ancient Egypt, the truth behind history's greatest mystery. We began this journey with a simple question: who burned the Library of Alexandria? After traveling through more than 1,000 years of history, examining ancient sources, exploring archaeological evidence, and comparing the theories of modern historians, we have finally reached the answer. The truth is both simpler and more complicated than the legend. There was almost certainly no single person who destroyed the Library of Alexandria, no single emperor, no single army, no single religion, no single fire. Instead, the library appears to have disappeared through a long chain of events that unfolded over several centuries. Julius Caesar's campaign may have destroyed part of the collection. Later Roman civil wars probably caused additional damage. Political instability weakened the institutions that had once supported scholarship. Economic decline reduced the resources needed to preserve fragile manuscripts. The destruction of the Serapeum likely erased another important collection of books. Time itself became an enemy, as aging papyrus scrolls slowly crumbled when they were no longer copied. By the time Muslim forces conquered Alexandria in the 7th century, the legendary library founded by the Ptolemies had almost certainly already vanished. This conclusion may disappoint those hoping for one dramatic ending, but history rarely unfolds like a movie. Real civilizations change slowly. Great achievements are often lost piece by piece rather than all at once. The story of Alexandria teaches us something far more important than the identity of a single destroyer. It teaches us that knowledge is fragile. A library is not only a building, it is a promise. A promise that one generation
will preserve its discoveries for the next. When that promise is broken, humanity loses part of its collective memory. Every lost manuscript represented years of careful thought. Every missing scroll contained a voice that can never speak again. Some may have described forgotten kingdoms. Others may have contained scientific observations. Some preserved poetry. Others recorded philosophy, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, or history. Many of those voices have been silent for nearly 2,000 years, yet the library also leaves behind a message of hope. Although countless books disappeared, the idea behind the library survived. The belief that knowledge should be collected,